9 months pregnant, Ava Sterling Ashford stood frozen in the doorway of the Grand Metropolitan Hotel ballroom. Her husband's hand rested on another woman's lower back, fingers spread with the kind of ownership that made her stomach turn. The woman wore scarlet Valentino, and if you look closely, which every person in that room was doing, you could see the slight curve of her own pregnancy beneath the designer fabric. Ava's phone vibrated against her palm. The message was only 6 words, but they held the power to destroy an empire. The papers are ready, say the word. The sender? Nathan Whitfield, the most ruthless divorce attorney in the city, who also happened to own 30% of her husband's company. 3 hours earlier, Ava had been arranging white roses in their $15 million penthouse when she found the receipt. Not hidden, just left carelessly on Dominic's desk, like her feelings had become that insignificant. One scarlet Valentino gown, size 6, picked up from Bergdorf's that morning. The same morning he'd told her she looked tired and should skip tonight's charity gala. "You're being hormonal," Dominic had said when she confronted him, not even looking up from his phone. "Sienna is attending in a professional capacity. She's our director of brand development." Professional capacity. The woman he'd been meeting every Tuesday and Thursday at the Rosemont Hotel. The woman whose perfume had replaced Ava's on his clothes. The woman carrying his other child. Ava had made 3 phone calls after that conversation. First to Madeline, her closest friend since college, who'd immediately offered her guest room. Second to her doctor, confirming she was medically cleared to attend the gala despite being 2 weeks from delivery. And third to Nathan Whitfield. "I've been waiting for this call," Nathan had said, his voice carrying a satisfaction that should have worried her. "I've been your husband's largest investor for 5 years, Mrs. Ashford. I know things about his business that would make your situation look like a parking ticket." "What kind of things?" "The kind that turn millionaires into memories. Did you know your prenup has 17 loopholes? Did you know that his company ownership is only 40%? Did you know that I structured his contracts with a moral turpitude clause that triggers a mandatory buyout at 60% of market value?" Ava had gripped the phone tighter. "Why would you invest $50 million in someone you plan to destroy?" "Because sometimes the best investments aren't about building something up. They're about being perfectly positioned when everything falls down. Your husband made an enemy of the wrong person a long time ago, Mrs. Ashford. I've simply been waiting for him to give me a reason." Now standing in that ballroom doorway, wearing the pale blue silk gown she'd had tailored before the pregnancy, Ava understood she was about to light a match that would burn down everything Dominic had built. 300 of the city's most powerful people filled the room. Mayors, senators, billionaires, journalists. Every single one of them was about to witness Dominic Ashford's carefully constructed world collapse. Sienna noticed her first. Ava watched recognition flash across those pretty features, followed by something colder. Calculation. The younger woman's hand moved to her own belly, a gesture designed to be noticed. To stake a claim. Dominic turned, following Sienna's gaze. When he saw his wife, 9 months pregnant in pale blue silk, standing in the doorway of the charity gala he'd told her to skip, his face went through a symphony of emotions. Surprise. Anger. Then something that looked almost like fear, because he knew what this meant. In their world, appearances were currency, and he'd just been caught publicly choosing his pregnant mistress over his pregnant wife. Ava stepped forward, each movement deliberate, measured. The crowd parted, whispers following in her wake. She had 24 hours to give Nathan the word. 24 hours to decide if she wanted to be a victim or a victor. But looking at her husband's hand still resting on that woman's back, she realized the decision was already made. To understand how Dominic Ashford ended up in that ballroom, you had to understand where he started. His father worked construction in Pittsburgh, coming home each night covered in concrete dust and exhaustion. His mother pulled double shifts at the hospital, saving every penny for her son's future. They lived in a 2-bedroom ranch house where the heater broke every winter and the roof leaked every spring. But Dominic had something his parents never did, and hunger that bordered on desperation. At 17, while his classmates worried about prom dates, he was learning to read architectural blueprints on construction sites. At 23, when others were still finding themselves, he'd saved enough to buy his first condemned property in a neighborhood everyone had written off. That single flip netted him $70,000. By 28, he'd turned that into his first million. By 30, he was the name everyone whispered when they needed a developer who could transform disaster into gold. By 40, Dominic Ashford didn't just own buildings, he owned the skyline. The Ashford Tower stood 42 floors of glass and ambition in the heart of downtown. His office occupied the entire top floor, a kingdom in the clouds where he could look down on everyone who'd ever doubted him. The walls displayed architectural awards and photos with governors. The desk cost more than his parents' house. Everything about that space screamed one message: Dominic Ashford had won. His first marriage to Victoria Blackwell had been another acquisition. She came from banking royalty, the kind of family whose name opened doors that money alone couldn't budge. Their wedding made the Times society pages. She bore him two daughters, Rosalind and Beatrice, and played the role of corporate wife with elegant perfection. She hosted dinner parties that secured deals, wore the right designers to the right events, and never questioned where he spent his Tuesday nights. After 15 years, Dominic realized Victoria bored him the same way his business had started to bore him. She was predictable, safe, another checkbox in a life that had become a series of conquered challenges. The divorce was so quiet most people didn't know it happened. $50 million and she disappeared to Greenwich, taking the daughters he saw twice a year at most. Then came Ava. He'd been touring the Contemporary Art Museum, writing a check for the tax deduction, when he heard her voice. She was explaining a violent abstract painting to a group of donors, talking about chaos and transition, about the space between who we were and who we're becoming. He'd stood there transfixed, watching this woman with dark hair and intelligent eyes who looked at him like she could see through his expensive suit to something more interesting underneath. Within 6 months, she'd moved into the penthouse. Ava was everything Victoria wasn't: challenging, unpredictable, passionate about ideas bigger than stock portfolios. She quoted philosophers he'd never heard of. She had opinions about his buildings that actually made him reconsider designs. She made him feel like that hungry kid from Pittsburgh again, like there was still something to prove. But here's what Dominic never understood about his success. It was built on a foundation of paper, and paper burns fast when someone lights the right match. His company structure was a maze of investor agreements in complex vehicles designed to maximize profits and minimize taxes. He owned 40% directly, but the rest was scattered among hedge funds, silent partners, and one very significant stakeholder: Nathan Whitfield, who'd invested $50 million during a critical expansion phase 5 years ago. What Dominic hadn't noticed, because he never read the fine print, was that Nathan had insisted on specific provisions: a moral turpitude clause, mandatory buyout triggers, voting provisions that could shift control under certain circumstances. Dominic had been so focused on the money, on the growth it would enable, that he'd signed his own execution warrant without realizing it. His recent aggressive expansion had left him leveraged and exposed. 3 major projects were underwater. His liquid assets were tied up in construction costs. He needed his investors' continued confidence to keep the empire standing, which is why the scene in that ballroom, his hand on Sienna's back while his pregnant wife watched, wasn't just a personal betrayal. It was the beginning of the end of everything he'd built. Sienna Dalton had mapped out her entire strategy 6 months before Dominic Ashford ever noticed her. She kept a leather journal in her Tribeca apartment where she documented every move, every conversation, every calculated decision. If you read those pages, you'd understand this was never about love. This was about survival disguised as seduction. At 27, Sienna had already failed twice. Her first startup collapsed, leaving her $80,000 in debt. Her family, old Connecticut money, cut her off when she refused to marry the banker's son they'd chosen. She arrived at Ashford Development Group with a Harvard MBA, a $65,000 salary, and a determination that would have impressed Dominic if he'd been paying attention to anything besides her legs. She studied him like other people study for the bar exam. Tuesday board meetings always ran late. Thursday site visits to the Westchester project. He drank Macallan 18, neat. He loosened his tie exactly 3 inches when stressed. His wife visited the office once a month, always looking slightly lost among the steel and glass. Sienna filed away every detail, waiting for her opening. The Tuesday meetings became her stage. She volunteered for every presentation, always wearing something that walked the line between professional and memorable. She learned to anticipate his questions before he asked them. When he mentioned preferring a certain restaurant, she'd have reservations waiting. When he complained about his coffee, she had his assistant's brew replaced with a $60 per pound Colombian blend. "You're very dedicated," he'd said one Thursday evening, finding her still at the office at 9 o'clock. "I believe in this company's vision," she'd replied, knowing exactly how much he needed to hear those words. His wife questioned his buildings. Sienna worshipped them. The affair started with work dinners that ran late, professional conversations that shifted to personal, her hand brushing his when passing documents. By the time they crossed the line, it felt inevitable to him. To her, it was step 17 of a 30-step plan. The pregnancy changed everything. Despite what she'd told Dominic about failed birth control, her best friend knew the truth. Sienna had stopped taking pills 2 months before their first night together. She needed something permanent, something that couldn't be dismissed with a severance check and an NDA. A baby was a lifetime connection. A baby was financial security. A baby was leverage. When Ava's pregnancy became visible, Sienna accelerated her timeline. She announced her own condition the same week Ava entered her third trimester. She pushed for the director position and got it. A salary jump to $250,000, plus benefits, plus the white Mercedes he'd leased in the company's name. The Tribeca Apartments rent started flowing from a corporate account. She was building her safety net thread by thread. But Sienna had made 3 critical miscalculations. First, she'd assumed Ava would retreat like the first wife had. Rich women in their circle didn't fight publicly. They negotiated privately and disappeared quietly. She hadn't anticipated a woman who'd grown up middle class, who'd earned her museum position, who understood what it meant to fight for something. Second, she'd never investigated Nathan Whitfield. If she had, she would have discovered the connection, the history, the careful positioning. She would have understood that Dominic's empire had been marked for demolition long before she'd submitted her job application. Third, and most dangerously, she'd kept records. The journal, the recordings on her phone of Dominic making promises he'd never keep, the screenshots of bank transfers. She'd thought she was protecting herself, creating insurance. Instead, she documented her own prosecution. The scarlet dress had been her idea, a declaration, a statement that she wasn't hiding anymore. Standing in that ballroom, feeling the weight of 300 stares, watching Ava approach with the steady grace of someone who'd already won, Sienna realized she'd played the game perfectly. The problem was, she'd been playing the wrong game entirely. Because this wasn't about who Dominic would choose. This was about who would survive what came next. And Sienna, despite all her planning, had never prepared for that. Nathan Whitfield had been waiting 27 years for this moment. Not this exact scenario. He couldn't have predicted the pregnant mistress in scarlet or the charity gala confrontation, but for Dominic Ashford's inevitable self-destruction. Some investments require patience. This one required decades. The story began with Nathan's father, Michael Whitfield, a construction foreman who'd worked for Ashford Development when Dominic was still climbing his way up. Michael died when a scaffolding collapsed on the Riverside Plaza project. Dominic, then 32 and hungry to cut costs, had been using substandard materials. The investigation was buried. The insurance claim was denied. Dominic refused to pay death benefits, claiming Michael had violated safety protocols. Nathan was 15, watching his mother work 3 jobs to keep their apartment. He sat in the courthouse during the lawsuit, studying Dominic's face as his lawyers argued that Michael Whitfield's death was his own fault. The case was dismissed. Dominic walked out smiling, already forgetting the foreman's name. Nathan never forgot. Yale Law School on a full scholarship. Top of his class. Law review editor. Offers from every major firm in the city. He chose family law, which made his professors laugh. Why waste that intellect on divorces? But Nathan understood something they didn't. Divorce lawyers held the keys to destroying empires. They saw the books, the assets, the secrets. They knew where bodies were buried, metaphorically speaking. By 35, Nathan had dismantled 3 Fortune 500 executives, 2 senators, and a federal judge. His reputation was surgical precision combined with strategic brutality. He didn't just win cases. He orchestrated destructions so complete that his opponents often changed careers, changed cities, changed their names. 5 years ago, he'd approached Dominic at a hospital fundraiser. "I want to invest," he'd said simply. "50 million. Your expansion into the Westchester markets." Dominic had been suspicious at first. Divorce lawyers didn't typically throw around that kind of money. But Nathan had prepared for this too. His practice had made him wealthy, his investments had made him rich, and his patience would make him victorious. "Why real estate?" Dominic had asked. "Because I believe in building things that last," Nathan had replied, knowing Dominic would miss the irony. The contracts Nathan drafted were masterpieces of hidden destruction. Every clause had teeth: the moral turpitude provision, the mandatory buyout triggers, the voting agreements that would shift under specific circumstances. His 30% stake came with provisions that Dominic's lawyers, good lawyers, but not Nathan-level lawyers, had missed entirely. Nathan had spent the next 5 years positioning pieces on the board. He'd hired private investigators to track Dominic's affairs. He'd placed associates in Ashford Development as consultants. He'd cultivated relationships with the other investors, especially the hedge funds that held 20%. He'd even influenced Sienna's hiring, having a contact recommend her for the position, knowing her ambition would catalyze exactly this kind of situation. When Ava called him 3 hours before the gala, Nathan was ready. His war room was already assembled. 12 attorneys, 4 accountants, 3 investigators. The documents were drafted, waiting only for names and dates. The offshore accounts in the Caymans had been tracked. The construction bid rigging from 2019 was documented. The tax issues were packaged for the IRS. "Mrs. Ashford," he'd said when she called, "I want you to understand what's about to happen. This isn't just a divorce. This is a complete dismantling. Your husband won't just lose you, he'll lose everything his name is attached to." "Why are you really doing this?" she'd asked. Nathan had considered lying, spinning a story about justice or protecting wronged wives. But Ava deserved the truth. Because 27 years ago, Dominic Ashford had a hand in my father's death and walked away laughing. Because he built his empire on the bodies of workers he considered expendable. Because someone needs to show him what it feels like to lose everything that matters. "So I'm just a weapon in your revenge?" "No," Nathan had said, surprising himself with his honesty. "You're the opportunity I've been waiting for. The difference is, you deserve to win. My father would have liked you." Standing in the courthouse now, watching Dominic's face as he realized the scope of what was happening, Nathan felt his father's presence. The foreman's son had become the architect of Dominic Ashford's destruction, and they were just getting started. 8:47 p.m. The Grand Metropolitan Hotel ballroom glittered with $5 million worth of diamonds and designer gowns. 300 of the city's most powerful people sipped champagne that cost more per bottle than most Americans made in a day. The Children's Hope Gala had raised $6 million before the appetizers were served. Then Ava Sterling Ashford walked through the side entrance. The whispers started immediately, spreading through the crowd like wildfire. Everyone knew about Dominic and his young director. Everyone had pretended not to notice. But now his 9 months pregnant wife stood in the doorway, wearing pale blue silk, and suddenly everyone had to pick a side. Mayor Hannah was the first to understand what was happening. She'd seen enough political scandals to recognize when someone was about to detonate their own life in public. She stepped back, pulling the police commissioner with her, creating space for what was coming. Dominic stood near the auction display, his hand still resting on Sienna's back. He was mid-conversation with Robert Yang, CEO of Yang Industries and a potential $100 million partner. Sienna wore her pregnancy like an accessory, one hand delicately placed on the subtle curve beneath her scarlet gown. They looked like a power couple. They looked like the future. They looked like they'd already won. Ava crossed the ballroom with the steady grace of someone who'd already made peace with chaos. Her blue gown caught the light with each step. The crowd parted, some from respect, most from morbid curiosity. Everyone wanted to witness what happened when a $40 million marriage exploded in real time. Jennifer Morrison, whose own husband had left her for his trainer last year, started recording on her phone. Within minutes, 7 different angles of this confrontation would exist, each one worth its weight in social currency. Sienna saw her first. The younger woman's expression shifted from confident to calculating. Her hand moved to her belly again, that protective gesture that was really an announcement. I'm carrying his baby too. I matter. Dominic turned, following Sienna's stare. For exactly 3 seconds, his face revealed everything. The surprise, the anger, the realization that his carefully separated worlds were colliding in front of everyone who mattered. Then his expression hardened into something colder. The look of a man who decided to double down instead of backing down. Ava, he said, loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear, you should be resting. It was a dismissal disguised as concern. A power play. Go home, little wife. This is my world. Ava smiled. Not the polite smile she wore to museum fundraisers or the warm smile she'd given him years ago when he'd proposed. This was something new, something dangerous. I wanted to give you something, she said, reaching into her clutch. The envelope was cream-colored, expensive paper with his name written in her distinctive handwriting. Inside were 2 documents. The first was their son's latest ultrasound, the one from yesterday's appointment, the one where the doctor had said everything looked perfect. The second was a subpoena. Dominic's hands actually trembled as he read. Around them, the silence had become suffocating. 300 people pretending not to stare while absolutely staring. Ava turned to Sienna, studying her with the detached interest of a curator evaluating a painting. The scarlet dress was a nice touch, bold, memorable. Her voice carried perfectly in the hushed ballroom. You'll need that confidence when Nathan Whitfield's team deposes you. Sienna's mask finally cracked. Nathan Whitfield's name was poison in their circles. He didn't just win divorces, he performed autopsies on marriages, revealing every secret, every lie, every hidden transaction. Finally, Ava addressed the room. Not shouting, not crying, just speaking with the clear authority of someone who'd already won. Please enjoy the gala. The children we're helping tonight deserve your full attention and generosity. They matter so much more than our personal drama. She walked out the same way she'd entered, measured, dignified, devastating. Behind her, the applause started with Jennifer Morrison, followed by Patricia Wellington, and then by 6 other women who'd been where Ava was standing. Not everyone clapped, but enough did. Dominic stood frozen, holding the papers, his empire beginning its collapse in real time. Sienna beside him, no longer looking like a winner. Nathan Whitfield, watching from the corner, raised his champagne in a silent toast to the foreman's son, who'd finally found his moment. 24 hours after the gala, Dominic Ashford's name was trending on 3 social media platforms. The video had been viewed 4 million times. Business Insider's headline read, Ashford Empire faces hostile takeover after public marriage scandal. By market open, the stock price had dropped 40%. Dominic sat in his office at 5 a.m., watching his life's work evaporate on multiple screens. Every financial channel was running the story. The footage from the gala played on loop, his hand on Sienna's back. Ava's dignified approach, the envelope, the exit, the applause. They turned his humiliation into content and content into revenue. His phone had logged 317 missed calls. Not one was from someone offering support. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. Nathan Whitfield had already informed the other investors that he'd be invoking the moral turpitude clause. The mandatory buyout at 60% of market value would cost Dominic approximately $160 million. Money he didn't have liquid. Money that would require selling everything. Robert Yang's assistant had emailed at midnight. Mr. Yang has decided to explore other partnerships. 3 sentences that killed a $100 million deal. By 7 a.m., 2 more major clients had pulled contracts, citing reputational concerns and misalignment of values. The Westchester project, already over budget, lost its primary funding. The Riverside renovation, his comeback property, was put on an indefinite hold. Dominic tried calling his lawyer, James Caleb, the one who'd helped him bury his father's death benefits case, the one who'd structured the divorce from Victoria. James didn't answer. His assistant said he was unavailable for the foreseeable future. At 8:15, Dominic's computer chimed with a new email. The sender was the Securities and Exchange Commission. Subject line, Notice of Investigation. Ashford Development Group. Nathan's team had been busy. They'd packaged evidence of construction bid rigging from 2019, delivered it with a bow to federal investigators who'd been waiting for exactly this kind of gift. The walls weren't just closing in, they were collapsing. Meanwhile, across the city, Ava was experiencing a different kind of collapse. The stress of the confrontation, the weight of the moment, the months of carrying both a baby and the knowledge of her husband's betrayal, it all crashed together at once. Madeline found her at 8:43 a.m., clutching her stomach, her water broken 3 weeks early. The ride to Mount Sinai Hospital took 12 minutes. Every bump in the road sent waves of pain through her body. Madeline held her hand, whispering that everything would be okay, that babies came early all the time, that she was strong enough for this. Nathan Whitfield received the call while walking into the boardroom for the emergency meeting. He didn't hesitate. "Start without me," he told his associates. "Document everything. I'll be there within the hour." He arrived at the hospital as Ava was being wheeled into delivery. "We're going to protect you," he said simply. "Both of you." "The meeting," Ava started, "is exactly where it needs to be. My team is handling it. Dominic is about to learn what happens when you build an empire on paper instead of stone." Back in the boardroom, Dominic was discovering exactly that. The other investors, the hedge funds, the silent partners, the institutional money, had already caucused. Nathan's empty chair somehow held more power than Dominic's presence. His attorneys, appearing via video conference, presented the case with surgical precision. Financial irregularities dating back 5 years, offshore accounts in 3 jurisdictions, tax avoidance that bordered on evasion, and now public scandal that had damaged the brand beyond repair. "We invoke the moral turpitude clause," the lead attorney stated. "Mandatory buyout proceedings begin immediately." Dominic's attempts to object were noted and dismissed. His 40% stake, once worth $160 million, would be purchased for $96 million. But after legal fees, tax penalties, and the divorce settlement that was coming, he'd be left with a fraction. Sienna had stopped returning his calls. Her apartment was empty when he sent someone to check. Her office had been cleaned out overnight. The white Mercedes was parked in the company garage with the keys on the seat. By noon, everything Dominic Ashford had spent 27 years building was no longer his. By 12:17 p.m., his son was born. He wouldn't learn about the birth for 3 more days. 3:47 a.m. Sebastian William Sterling Ashford entered the world screaming, which seemed appropriate given the circumstances of his birth. 7 pounds, 2 ounces of perfect health, despite arriving 3 weeks early. His mother's first words to him weren't about love or welcome or joy. They were about strength. "You're already stronger than him," Ava whispered, holding her son for the first time, while machines beeped around them and nurses checked vital signs. Dominic learned about his son's birth from a court document. Nathan Whitfield personally delivered the custody papers to his temporary office, a rented space on the 20th floor of a building he used to own. The restraining order was comprehensive. No hospital visits, no contact without court supervision, no rights until a judge said otherwise. "You're enjoying this," Dominic said, his voice hollow. "I'm completing this," Nathan corrected. "There's a difference. Your son deserves better than a father who chose his mistress over his mother." The court agrees. While Dominic sat in that rented office reading legal documents, Sienna Dalton was sitting in Nathan's conference room, making a different kind of choice. She'd arrived with 2 suitcases and a hard drive containing 18 months of recordings. Every conversation with Dominic, every promise he'd made, every discussion about hiding assets. She'd thought she was protecting herself. Now she realized she'd been building someone else's case. "I want $5 million," she said, "and complete immunity from prosecution." Nathan's associate, Margaret Ryan, slid a document across the table. $3 million, full NDA. You disappear completely. No book deals, no interviews, no social media posts about your time at Ashford Development. You become a ghost. That's not enough for what I'm giving you. Margaret smiled the way sharks probably smiled right before feeding. "What you're giving us, Ms. Dalton, is evidence of your own conspiracy to defraud Mrs. Ashford. Your pregnancy was planned. We have the fertility clinic records. You documented your intention to extract financial gain through manipulation. That's fraud, potentially criminal." Sienna's hands shook as she realized her position. She'd thought she was playing chess. She'd actually been playing checkers while everyone else was playing three-dimensional warfare. However, Nathan said, entering the room with perfect timing, we're willing to be generous. 5 million as you asked. But there's one more requirement. He placed a single sheet of paper in front of her. At the top, sworn affidavit regarding Dominic Ashford's hidden assets. He has 12 million in cryptocurrency, Sienna said quietly, hidden under shell companies. Another 8 million in art he purchased through fake auctions to launder money. 2 properties in Miami under his brother's name. He thought I didn't know, but I had access to his computer. I documented everything. She signed the affidavit. Then she signed the NDA. Then she left the city with $5 million in the understanding that Sienna Dalton, for all practical purposes, had never existed. Back at the hospital, Sebastian was meeting his extended family. Not Dominic's family. They'd gone silent the moment the scandal broke. But Ava's family. Her parents flying in from Ohio. Her sister from Seattle. Madeline, who'd been there for every contraction, every push, every moment of triumph and terror. The baby had his mother's dark hair, already thick for a newborn. His eyes, when they opened, held a focus that seemed unusual for someone 3 days old. The nurses kept commenting on how alert he was, how aware. He knows he's got a fighter for a mother, one said, changing his blanket. Ava held her son and thought about the battle still coming. The divorce would be brutal. Dominic would fight with everything he had left, which wasn't much, but was still dangerous. Nathan had warned her it could take 18 months, maybe longer. But looking at Sebastian's face, she felt something she hadn't expected. Peace. Not because the war was over, but because she finally knew what she was fighting for. Not revenge, not money, not even justice. She was fighting for the right to raise her son away from a man who'd proven he could betray anyone, even his own unborn child. The birth certificate listed the father's name, but everyone in that hospital room knew that biology didn't make someone a father. Choices did. 6 months later, Courtroom 4B of the New York Supreme Court became the stage for Dominic Ashford's final performance. The gallery was packed with reporters, business associates, and socialites who'd cleared their calendars to watch a $400 million empire officially flatline. Nathan Whitfield entered carrying 847 pages of evidence in 3 leather portfolios. His team of 12 attorneys moved like a military unit, each one responsible for a specific aspect of Dominic's destruction. Financial fraud, adultery, hidden assets, offshore accounts, tax evasion. They divided his life into categories of failure. Judge Amber Stern, 62 years old with 30 years on the bench, had overseen dozens of high-asset divorces, but this one was different. The documentation was overwhelming. The evidence was irrefutable. The plaintiff's attorney happened to be the defendant's largest creditor. It was, she'd tell her husband later, like watching someone perform surgery with a chainsaw. Dominic's new lawyer, his fourth, after 3 others had withdrawn, attempted an opening statement about complex business arrangements and misunderstandings amplified by emotion. He got 6 sentences in before Nathan stood up. Your Honor, we move to submit Exhibit A through F, 6 years of falsified documents filed with the SEC. The judge's eyebrows rose. This is a divorce proceeding, Mr. Whitfield, not a criminal trial. The financial fraud directly impacts the marital assets, Your Honor. We need to establish what assets actually exist versus what Mr. Ashford has claimed. By lunch on the first day, Dominic's lawyer was sweating through his suit. The smoking gun came at 2:15 p.m. Nathan presented an email Dominic had sent to Sienna 3 days after Ava told him she was pregnant. The subject line was blank. The content was 2 sentences. Once I move Ava out, we'll have everything. Her father's connections, my infrastructure, your ambition. The courtroom went silent. Even the court reporter paused. Move her out, Nathan repeated. Not divorce, not separate. Move out. Like she was furniture that no longer matched his design aesthetic. Dominic tried to object, to claim the email was taken out of context. But Nathan had 17 more emails, each one more damaging than the last. Plans to hide money, discussions about manipulating stock prices, conversations about using the pregnancy as leverage in negotiations. When Sienna took the stand via video deposition, her location protected by the court, she delivered testimony with the precision of someone who'd rehearsed every word. Yes, the pregnancy was planned. Yes, Dominic knew about it while his wife was pregnant. Yes, he'd promised to make her CEO once Ava was handled. Did Mr. Ashford ever express concern about his wife's pregnancy? Nathan asked. He said it was inconvenient timing for the business. What about the child, his son? He said children were investments. You put money in, you expect returns. He wasn't interested in investments with 18-year maturation periods. Ava testified on day 3. She wore a simple black dress, no jewelry except her grandmother's pearl necklace. She spoke quietly, forcing everyone to lean forward to hear her. The strategy was deliberate. Make them work to hear the pain. She described finding receipts for jewelry she'd never received, credit card statements for hotels during her pregnancy. The moment she'd realized the man she'd married had been performing intimacy the way other people performed Shakespeare, convincingly, but without genuine feeling. I don't want to destroy him, she said, looking directly at Dominic for the first time since the gala. I want to be free from him. I want my son to grow up knowing his worth isn't determined by his net worth. The judge's ruling came after 6 days of testimony, full custody to Ava, supervised visitation for Dominic, 2 hours monthly, $100 million settlement, paid through liquidation of all remaining assets, child support of $85,000 monthly until Sebastian turned 18. But the real destruction came in the judge's final words. This court recommends criminal investigation into Mr. Ashford's financial dealings. The evidence presented suggests a pattern of fraud that extends well beyond this divorce. Dominic left the courthouse through the back exit, avoiding the cameras. Nathan left through the front, announcing that Ashford Development Group would be renamed Whitfield Holdings, effective immediately. Ava didn't leave at all. She sat in the empty courtroom, holding Sebastian, finally free. 6 months after the courthouse verdict, Dominic Ashford lived in a 2-bedroom apartment on the Upper West Side. Not a penthouse, not even a particularly nice building. Just a place with working heat and a doorman who didn't recognize his name. The walls were beige. The furniture came from a catalog. Everything about it screamed ordinary, which for a man who'd spent 30 years being extraordinary felt like death by 1,000 paper cuts. The settlement had left him with $40 million. After taxes, legal fees, and the criminal investigation that was still ongoing, he had about 18 million liquid. Enough to live comfortably forever. Not enough to matter in the circles where he'd once been king. His phone rang twice a day, once from his accountant, updating him on assets being sold, once from his lawyer, warning him about potential federal charges. Everyone else had disappeared. The country club had revoked his membership after 3 members complained about reputational damage to the institution. His usual restaurants suddenly had no available reservations. The charity boards he'd sat on sent polite letters requesting his resignation. Even his barber of 15 years claimed to be fully booked. Meanwhile, Nathan Whitfield was rebuilding the company Dominic had spent decades constructing. The transition was ruthless and efficient. Every executive who'd been loyal to Dominic was offered a choice: pledge allegiance to the new structure or find employment elsewhere. Most stayed. Bills needed to be paid. Mortgages didn't care about loyalty. Nathan renamed it Whitfield Holdings and immediately announced a $100 million fund for affordable housing. We believe in building communities, not just buildings, he said at the press conference, standing in the exact spot where Dominic used to hold his announcements. The company's value increased by 30% in the first quarter under Nathan's control. The Westchester project, which had been failing under Dominic, was restructured and sold for a $60 million profit. The Riverside renovation became the city's most sought-after address. Everything Dominic touched had turned to gold, but only after he stopped touching it. Ava had purchased a brownstone in Brooklyn Heights, 4 bedrooms, a garden, original hardwood floors from 1892. She'd paid cash, $12 million from the settlement. The rest went into trust for Sebastian's education and her foundation for single mothers. She'd returned to the museum part-time, curating a new exhibition on resilience in contemporary art. The opening night drew 500 guests, including several women who'd gone through similar divorces. They formed an informal support group, meeting monthly for wine and war stories. Sebastian was walking now, 15 months old and determined to explore every corner of his world. He had his mother's dark hair and thoughtful eyes, but his laugh was entirely his own. During Dominic's supervised visits, 2 hours monthly at a court-approved facility, the boy barely acknowledged his father's presence. "He doesn't know me," Dominic said during the third visit, watching Sebastian play with blocks while ignoring his attempts at interaction. "Children recognize love," the supervisor replied. "They also recognize its absence." The criminal investigation accelerated when a whistleblower from Dominic's former company came forward with additional evidence. Construction permits falsified, safety inspections bypassed, 3 more worker deaths over the years that had been covered up with settlements and NDAs. The FBI expanded their investigation. The Southern District of New York opened a grand jury. Dominic tried to leave the country, booking a flight to Switzerland where he still had connections. Federal agents met him at the gate. His passport was confiscated. He was now officially a flight risk. The final humiliation came from an unexpected source. Victoria, his first wife, published an op-ed in the Times. "The man I didn't know I married detailed 15 years of psychological manipulation, financial control, and emotional absence." Their daughters, Rosalind and Beatrice, now in their 20s, added their own statement. "We support our mother and have no relationship with our biological father." Dominic read it alone in his beige apartment, drinking scotch that didn't taste as good as the Macallan 18 he could no longer afford. Outside, New York continued its relentless pace. Inside, a man who'd once owned the skyline discovered what it felt like to be forgotten by it. The reckoning wasn't just financial, it wasn't just legal. It was the slow, grinding realization that he'd built nothing that would last beyond his collapse. 3 years later, the ballroom at the Grand Metropolitan Hotel was filled again. The same champagne flutes, the same elegant lighting, the same charity gala for children's health care. But everything else had changed. Ava Sterling stood at the podium as the honorary chair, wearing midnight blue instead of pale blue, confidence instead of uncertainty. Sebastian, now 4 years old, sat at the head table in a tiny tuxedo, coloring in a dinosaur book while 500 of the city's most powerful people applauded his mother. 3 years ago, Ava began, "I walked into this room as someone's wife. Tonight I stand here as Sebastian's mother, as a curator at our city's museum, and as the founder of the Rising Foundation, which has helped 73 single mothers restart their careers after divorce." The applause was genuine this time, not the scattered sympathy from before, but real recognition of achievement. Nathan Whitfield sat at table 3, Whitfield Holdings having donated $2 million to the cause. His company was now valued at $900 million, with projects in 6 cities. He'd promoted Margaret Ryan to CEO, keeping himself as chairman. His father's portrait hung in the lobby. Michael Whitfield, construction foreman, 1952-1998. "Built with integrity," read the plaque beneath it. Dominic watched the live stream from his apartment, the same apartment, though now with an ankle monitor that tracked his movements while awaiting trial. The federal case had expanded to include racketeering charges. His lawyer predicted 7 to 10 years minimum. His money was frozen. His name was poison. His legacy was a cautionary tale told at business schools about how hubris could destroy empires. He watched his son on the screen, saw him tug at Ava's dress to show her something in his coloring book. The boy looked happy, healthy, loved. Everything Dominic had never been able to give because he'd been too busy acquiring things that didn't matter. At the gala, a man approached Ava during the cocktail hour, Dr. Mason Park, a pediatric surgeon at Mount Sinai, who'd been consulting with her foundation. He made Sebastian laugh with a magic trick involving a disappearing quarter. They'd been dating for 6 months, though she'd kept it private until now. "Your son is remarkable," Mason said, watching Sebastian explain his dinosaur drawings to the mayor. "He gets that from surviving his father," Ava replied, then softened. "No, that's not fair. He gets it from learning early that love isn't about possession. It's about presence." Sienna Dalton, now Sienna Matthews, lived in Portland under her married name. She'd used the $5 million to disappear completely, marrying a software developer who knew nothing about her past. Her daughter was 2 years old now. She'd named her Grace, hoping the name might manifest the quality. Sometimes she Googled Dominic's name, watching his destruction continue with the detached interest of someone viewing a car accident from a safe distance. The gala raised $12 million that night. Nathan gave a speech about building communities instead of just buildings. The mayor announced a new initiative for affordable housing. Sebastian fell asleep on his mother's lap during the auction, comfortable in a room that had once been the site of his family's explosion. As the evening ended, Nathan approached Ava at the coat check. "Your husband was my greatest investment," he said, the same words from years before. "No, Nathan," Ava replied, helping Sebastian into his coat. "Your greatest investment was believing I deserve better." Nathan smiled, the expression reaching his eyes for once. "My father would have been proud of you, of what you built from the ruins." "We both built something," Ava corrected. "You built a company. I built a life." They parted in the lobby, Nathan to his driver, Ava to her brownstone, where Mason would join them for breakfast tomorrow. Sebastian would show him his new dinosaur book. They'd make pancakes. It would be ordinary and perfect, and nothing like the life she'd once thought she wanted. The camera pulled back from the Grand Metropolitan Hotel. The same building, the same ballroom, but an entirely different kingdom. Not one built on acquisition and intimidation, but on resilience and reinvention. Some women survive their storms, others become them. But the rarest ones? They build lighthouses for the women still lost at sea. In the end, Dominic Ashford learned the hardest truth about empires. The ones built on betrayal always fall, but the ones built on broken hearts, those are the ones that last forever.